Hi everyone, today's project is to refinish an iron railing. As you'll be able to see in a few moments, the paint is peeling, it's extremely rusty, and it's really just not looking too good at all. It's just been getting worse and worse over the past few years, so I decided it's finally time to do something about it. In terms of materials we're going to need for this, the first thing is spray paint. I'm just using a Tremclad rust paint since it is kind of rusty. We are going to be using a sanding sponge, 60 grit. This is nice and soft, so it really gets into the nooks and crannies. I'm going to use an angle grinder with a 40 grit flap disc, which is just going to help remove the old paint much more easily. We've got some newspaper, which we're going to use to mask off the work area, masking tape to hold down the newspaper. And we've also got here a respirator. This is going to be really important as we're sanding old paint. We don't know how old it is. It could have lead in it or something like that, so it's better to be nice and safe. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is get this old paint off. I'm using my angle grinder here, but if you don't have an angle grinder, don't worry. You can still do this with regular sandpaper. It's just going to take some more time. You could also use solvents to remove paints, but in my past experience, I found that to be very messy, and this is just, it doesn't make a goopy mess all over the place. So as I'm going along here, I'm just trying to get as much of the paint off as you can. I think as I said earlier, this is a 40 grit flap disc, so it's pretty aggressive, and it makes pretty quick work of removing this old paint. So once we have as much off as we can with the angle grinder, we're going to move on to the sanding sponge here, and this is just really to get in all the little details. Because it's soft and flexible, it's able to easily work its way into corners or into small crevices, and this has some detailed areas on it, so it really helps get into those areas too. This is really slow work, and the one thing I would suggest, I only bought a single one of these sanding sponges. I would probably buy 3 of them if I were to do it again, and if possible I would buy one that was more aggressive, like a 40 grit, or even if they had something lower. This took a really long time, and by the time I was done it was shredded. And I don't know if you remember what this looked like at the beginning, but it is looking so much better, so much smoother, very limited rust. And so we're able to move on to the stage where we're going to start masking off the area for painting. Again, something I learned is to mask off a much bigger area than the area I did. I spent quite a bit of time doing this with some old flyers, and I didn't get as big of an area as I should have. So I'm going to have some cleanup to do with the power washer later this week. One thing to look out for is to make sure you really get the tape and the paper close to the edges on these little details. And before we move on to paint, we want to give everything a wipe down. There's a lot of the dust on here from sanding, as you can see on my cloth here. So just take some paper towel or a cloth and give everything a good wipe down. Before you begin painting, it's always a good idea to read the can and look at the directions. They mostly say the same thing, and so I'm just kind of going over this in light, even coats, keeping it about 30 to 40 centimeters away where I can. Because this was an intricate piece to paint in some ways, I wasn't able to always stay 30 centimeters away, but I was still able to avoid any runoff, and that's the main thing, just light, even coats wherever possible. And it's looking so much better already, wow. This is another important time to make sure you have your respirator or mask on, because these paint particles are not nice to breathe in. And we finished our first coat, and what a big improvement that is over what we had before. I can't believe how much better it looks, and we've only done the first coat. So I let the first coat dry for about 40 minutes, and then we moved on to the second coat. Again, you can go a little bit thicker on this one, but nice even coats is really important to avoid any runoff. I found my coverage was pretty good after even the first coat, so I wanted to make sure the second coat really finished it up. But you want to make sure on your second coat that you really do cover everything if you don't intend to do any final coats. And you can see here that we're finished, and this looks amazing. We'll be showing in a few moments what it looked like beforehand, but it just looks, the improvement is so big, it's hard to overstate. Yeah, you can see that all the rust peeling, it was in a really bad shape before. So that's a big improvement over what we had. And I feel like the project was so worth it. For less than $50, we did a really, really good job. It looks so much better, and we have a respirator that we can use on other projects in the future. And so if you liked my video or found that helpful, please consider subscribing or leave a comment below to let me know what you think.